Uh, Good day, everyone. Welcome back to our lecture series on biostatistics. As usual, my name is Abdul Hakim Abayomi Olorokoba. I'm from the Public Health Informatics Unit of the Department of Community Medicine, Ahmadu Bello University, Zaria. So in our previous sessions, we discussed the meaning of statistics and how statistics can be referred to as statistical data or even as statistics as a science. So we also discussed how this data needs to be collected in a standard way for this data to be useful, right? Because we know that statistics is used for decision making, right? Um, so the data that is used for this decision making, um, the only way to be able to make accurate decision is by collecting this data in a special container called variables. Okay, so and that's when we came to variables and their measurements. All right, so we discussed the different types of variables, if you remember, and then we came to different scales of measurement where we talked about the nominal, ordinal, um, interval, and ratio scales. Right, we went further to discuss data collection as it relates to problem solving using statistical inquiry, which is just similar to like carrying out a research just to solve a kind of problem, right? So in this final session, which is session 4, we're going to be talking about sources of data. We'll be talking about the best places where this data can be collected in a good way, such that when you analyze it, you'll be able to interpret and get good results that you use for decision making. So I welcome every one of you to the ever interesting study session where we'll be talking about the sources of data. So as usual, we'll start this our study session with the learning outcomes, right? So we're going to be talking about the sources of data, like I said earlier, and we'll start by giving an introduction where we'll tell you about what we mean by sources of data, right? And then we go ahead to let you know that data can either be classified also as primary data and secondary data. In our previous sessions, we have seen that data can be classified as quantitative or qualitative, and depending on the kind of scale of measurement, it can either be nominal, ordinal, interval, or ratio. Here we'll be looking at a data, classifying it based on the source. Where is the data collected from? Is it from a primary source or from a secondary source? And you see as we go along. We're talking about also the methods of collection of primary data, where you will see and you will understand the differences between primary and secondary data, because it's mainly in the way in which the data is being collected. And then one very important source of primary data is called the questionnaire. So we're going to talk a bit more about the questionnaire and how do you make up a questionnaire. Now, a lot of you are going to do research, or some of you are already into research, and some of you are even primarily into research where the unit of inquiry are individuals that you go and ask them questions. So when you go and ask them questions, you have a tool with you which is called the questionnaire. A lot of us are particular or are very familiar with this questionnaire. So we'll also come to the sources of secondary data. Is it from published sources or from unpublished sources? Are they from government sources or from non-governmental sources or from semi-governmental sources? All right, and then we'll give you a summary and we'll conclude. Okay. So after going through the preliminaries discussed in our initial sessions, we come to the main issue, um, which is data collection, right? So, but you know, the most important factor in any statistical inquiry is the original collection of data. And then if this data is collected correctly, right, and properly, then we know that our statistical inquiry is going to be correct. So what we mean here is that for you to be able to make any sense of data that is collected, and for you to be able to use it for decision making, proper decision making, right, or wise decision making, the data needs to be collected properly and from a correct and reliable source. And that brings us to this issue of the sources of data. So, but I want to start by saying that everything starts with a problem. You won't want to do a statistical inquiry without a problem. So you have a particular problem that you're trying to look for a solution to the problem. Maybe the problem is that a lot of people are coming down with hypertension, and we're trying to look for a solution to that problem, right? So we know that for us to be able to do that, we have to take we have to do a statistical inquiry for us to be able to get adequate information about the number of people that are hypertensive, what type of hypertension do they have, and the rest, such that we're going to be able to make decisions in trying to find a solution to the problem. All right, so it follows this particular sequence. Now, for us to be able to do this statistical inquiry properly, if there are inadequacies or shortcomings or pitfalls at the source or at the very source of the data that we're going to use, then we're not going to be able to make useful and valid conclusions. So if we cannot draw useful and valid conclusions after applying all the our resources, then this is going to be a waste of resources, right? No matter how you apply for sophisticated techniques and data analysis, as long as the source of the data is not correct, then you'll be giving wrong results. So therefore, in this study session, we are going to discuss the sources of data and the methods that are associated with obtaining very good data, such that you can be able to invariably have decisions that are wise and decisions that will help you after you've made your statistical inquiry. Yeah, so just to quickly take us back through the memory lane, in the previous sessions we talked about statistical inquiry. So, and if you are going to do a statistical inquiry, you have to start by having a kind of goal, which is like the outcome that you want to achieve, right? So if you achieve this, for you to be able to achieve this goal, you will have to set up some specific objectives, right? And these objectives help you to organize, or to help you to be organized in order to achieve that goal. So all those things that you put in place to help you to be organized, to like those steps that will help you to achieve those goals, they're the objectives, right? And these objectives, for you to be able to make up these objectives, you have to now collect data. So when you collect the data, you know that this data has to be collected, or the data collection has to be done properly, as it's one of the most important aspects, or one of the most important parts of the statistical inquiry as a whole. But aside from collecting this data properly, it's not just only collecting it properly that is the issue here. The issue is that the data also must be from a credible source, right? A credible and reliable source. This data that is collected will now be analyzed, right? And then the analysis of this data is what leads to our interpretation. And the interpretation is what we'll now use to make our decision, and this decision has to be a wise decision. So you can get the way, the sequence of things that go into a statistical inquiry, right? Now, we've just said that data collection is one of the most important factors in this statistical inquiry, because aside from the fact that the data needs to be collected properly in a systematic manner, the source of the data also needs to be proper, and also needs to be a good source, a reliable source, a credible source. Now, problems with data collection will lead to poor interpretation, and this can cause a lot of problems. So whatever you do, you have to ensure that proper data is collected, and it's collected from a reliable and a credible source. So we're going to be talking about data sources as it relates to where the data is coming from, or who originated the data. Okay, here in data can be obtained from the following two sources. All right, it's either the person doing the statistical inquiry goes out to collect the data by himself, or maybe the agency goes out to collect the data by themselves, right, originally, right? Or the person can obtain the data or the necessary data for his inquiry from data that has already been collected, right? Data that has been already been collected by a group of individuals on that particular subject, right? So the data which is originally collected by an investigator or by a person or an agency for the first time for use in any statistical inquiry is called primary data. And this can be internal or external. We're going to explain that in a couple of slides. Okay, just understand that the original data, when collected by an investigator or an agency for the first time to be used for some statistical inquiry, is called the primary data. Okay, so it's original because the person collected it himself and it's the first people that originated data for a specific purpose. Okay, on the other hand, right, the data can be either published or unpublished, but that has already been collected and processed by some other agency or some other persons, but we collect it from them to use it, and this is called secondary data. So imagine another agency has collected data. For them it's primary data, right? But for we that were collecting it is secondary data. Note that this data was primary for the people that originally collected it, right? This is important, please. We need to get this very clearly. The data that were terming secondary data, right? It was primarily for some other people, the people that collected it originally is their primary data, but it's now secondary data for us that will collect it from them to use it. Okay, so that goes so there goes a saying that has been popularized by me. I think I'm the one that made up this saying, right? Just like the saying that we know that one man's meat is another man's poison. Yeah, so one man's primary data is another man's secondary data. Okay, so note that the second people, like the other people that have collected this data, if they've collected, some people have collected data and they publish it, and so that this data is available for people to take and use as their own source also, that's secondary. Okay, so what I'm just saying is that it's for us to observe that the distinction between primary and secondary data is relative, right? It's a matter of relativity. The same set of data may be secondary in the hands of someone, right? And I'll give you an example. And primary in the hands of others. So in general, what I'm just trying to say here very simply is that data are primary to the source that collects it. The person that actually collects that data is primary to him, right? The original person that brings up the data. Okay, so the person might process it and for use, right? But the person collects it for the first time. That's primary, and it is secondary for all other people that use the data afterwards. Okay, so I'll give you an example. There's this survey that I know most of you people in public health, the ones that are already doing public health, or most of you people in sciences already know. It's a very popular data set. It's called the NDHS. You'll be hearing it a lot. It's the Nigerian Demographic and Health Survey, or some people say it's the National Demographic and Health Survey. Now this survey is done every 4 years, and it collects data from men and women. The last survey that was done collected data from about 36,986 women. It was done nationally by a group called the ICF Macro, in collaboration with the federal government of Nigeria, using the Federal Ministry of Health, right? So this group went out and collected data from people in the different geopolitical zones in Nigeria, right, in order to be able to give us adequate data of what's happening. It's demographic data, right? So we as public health physicians or public health researchers, we usually sometimes apply for the data sets and use it to run further analysis to find out more insights that can be used to shape policy direction or for policy development, right? So the guys at NDHS that collected that data, to them, that data is what? What do you think? Yeah, you're correct. So to them, that data is primary, right? That data is primary. But for we, because they collected it originally themselves, right? They are the originators of the data, right? While we that will use this data, it is secondary for us. I really hope this is clear. It's important that we understand this distinction between primary source and secondary source, primary data and secondary data. Also, taking you through a quick schematic also that will probably make you understand this a little more. They are the, like we said initially, that the data sources could be primary or secondary. So those primary sources where individuals are able to get primary data from, yeah, these primary sources can either be by individuals or group of individuals doing some form of observation, and this observation can either be participant observation or non-participant observation. We'll explain it a little more. And then it can either be this individual going out to interview, and I'm sure a lot of us have heard about different interviews that can be structured or unstructured, where you'll be hearing about key informant interviews, focus group discussion, and the rest, right? In-depth interviews, okay? Or the one that is very popular, which we're going to delve very much on, is when you use a questionnaire, which most of you guys are going to also do, or most of you guys are already familiar in doing. These questionnaires can either be mailed to individuals. I don't know if this is done really in Nigeria, right? But yeah, you can have email questionnaires that are emailed to you, which you fill, or you can have something that's called a collective questionnaire, or some people call it a schedule, where you send out interviewers to go and give questionnaires or administer questionnaires to individuals. On the other hand, here it can be from secondary sources, and most of the time this is from documents or from databases that will be made available to individuals. They have been collected by people before, but if you are collecting it now, we're talking about, when we talk about these methods of data collection, we're actually talking about you as an individual. If you bring up the data yourself, then it's a primary source, right? It's primary data. But if you use data that has been collected by others, then it's secondary. So you can get this from government publications, you can get this from research that has been done earlier, right? You can get this from census data, which you can get in the National Bureau of Statistics or Nigerian Bureau of Statistics, the NBS. You can get this from personal records. You can get this from client histories in the hospitals, or from even service records. Okay, so just get it clearly here that what we're talking about has to do with the individual that is sourcing out that data. If you go and source out the data by yourself, it's called primary. It's a primary source. It's original. You originated it yourself. But if the data was originated by others, then it's secondary for you. It's primary for them because they are the original source of the data, and then it's secondary for you. And these are the ways in which you can get this. So we'll quickly go into the ways in which you can, the methods of collecting primary data, right? So there are various ways in which you can collect primary data. The first is something that we call the direct personal investigation, right? And this method consists of collection of data personally by the investigator or by the individual or by the agency from the sources that are concerned, that concerns that kind of study or that kind of inquiry. So what we're saying here is that, in other words, the investigator has to go to the field by himself personally for making inquiries and soliciting information from the informants or from respondents. Yeah, this nature of investigation a lot of times, right, usually restricts the scope of the inquiry. Right, we've heard about scope before. So, and obviously we should know that this technique is usually suited if the inquiry is intensive rather than an extensive kind of stuff. So you want to really get information out of people. So the methods, this kind of method that you go and do a direct personal investigation, is generally local and is confined to like a small place, maybe a single locality or a region or an area. And since such investigations require the personal attention of the investigator. They are not usually suitable for extensive studies. You cannot do plenty, something that covers a large area, if you have to rely on an individual or group of individuals going to do that. So when the scope of the investigation is quite wide, you cannot rely on using a direct personal investigation, right? So because obviously the information gathered from such investigation is going to be original in nature, since you are the person that will be bringing it, but it's only used for something intensive, not extensive, right? Okay. The other one we'll be talking about is called the indirect oral interviews. Indirect oral interviews. And the indirect oral interviews here, when the direct personal investigation is not practicable, right? It's something maybe it's difficult to do, or it's not something you can do, either because of some kind of unwillingness or reluctance of the persons that are supposed to provide that information, or due to the extensive nature of the inquiry, something that's going to cover a wide scope, or due to the fact that direct sources of information do not even exist or are not reliable, then you have to use an indirect oral investigation. Okay, so for example, if we want to like solicit information, we want to get information on some certain social evils or some social vices, like smoking addiction or addiction to drinking or gambling, or even homosexuality, or something that is just a vice, the individuals or the persons that are supposed to give us this information would be reluctant to give information directly, or he may even give wrong information, right? So the information on the gambling or the drinking, on the smoking habits of individuals, can best be obtained by interviewing maybe his friends, his relatives, or his neighbors who know him very well, but may not, but will not be shy to give that kind of information. So that's why it's called indirect oral interviews. It's not directly from the individuals, but it's from people that are like friends or relatives or neighbors who know that person that has that social vice very well, thoroughly enough to be able to give the kind of information that we need. In these types of inquiries, factual data on different problems are actually collected by interviewing persons who are directly or indirectly concerned with the subject matter of inquiry, and who are usually in possession of the kind of information that we need. So this method consists of collection of the data through enumerators that are actually appointed for this purpose. A small list of questions pertaining to the subject matter of the inquiry is usually prepared, and this one happens in a lot of times, especially when you are doing an oral interview. And these questions are then put to the persons who are like going to give you the information. Remember, we're saying that these persons are persons that are directly or indirectly related to the individual that we would have done a direct investigation on, but we cannot, right, because of the kind of the matter. So the questions are put to these persons, and we call these persons witnesses or informants, who have that information, and their replies are actually recorded. So such a procedure for collection of this factual data on different problems is usually adopted in by committees or inquiry committees or commissions appointed by the government. So sometimes you have government appointees that do commissions that are appointed by the government to do stuff like the EFCC, or people that are supposed to find out some kind of factual information and cannot go and ask that information directly from the chief or from the person that is being suspected, or the person that is being thought of doing some kind of fraud or something. So that's that. The third one, you can have information that is received through local agencies, right? So through local agencies, and in this method, the information is not collected formally by the investigator or by the enumerators. This method consists of the appointment of local agents, commonly called correspondents. So in this case, we call them correspondents by the investigator, in different parts of the field of inquiry. So, and what we understand here is that these correspondents or agencies in different regions collect the information according to their own ways, according to their own fashions, according to their own likings, and the decisions according to their decisions. Yeah. So and then they submit their reports periodically to the central head office. This is also a kind of primary data that is collected, right? So the central or head office will process the data and then do some kind of final analysis. So this technique of data collection is usually employed by newspapers. I'm sure everybody has started thinking about newspapers. Yeah, this is how they get their data that they report, or from periodical agencies that usually require information. They require this information in, like, so for example, like those people that watch football a lot, or sports, those that watch the UFC, or even in situations where you have riots or where you have strikes, the doctors are on strike, or some people have gone on strike, or even accidents, where you're not actually there, right? But there are people that can help you to get in different regions. There are correspondents, like you hear a newspaper correspondent or a news correspondent, or agencies that can help to collect that information and send it to a central body that is going to now report it. Like things like economic trend, or even business stocks, or where you have market shares or policies, all these things. So this method is usually used very, very well by different departments of government, where information is desired or at regular intervals, or in periods, or desired like periodically from a wide area, right? And this method is actually particularly useful in obtaining estimates of agricultural crops, which may usually be submitted to the government by, let's say, like village school teachers, or very, very interesting other interesting examples, right? A more sophisticated or refined way of the use of this particular technique, where you have information received through local agencies, is like the registration method, in which you see like all those vital registrations. So when you remember, like birth rates, death rates, incidence of a disease. So usually there's people in the community or local individuals that report to the appropriate authorities that are appointed by the government. These people can be appointed by even civil hospitals or by health departments, and usually so you even find some of them give information immediately after it occurs. Another way that we've talked about earlier is the mailed questionnaire method, and this method consists of this method actually consists in preparing like a questionnaire, right? Another method is also questionnaires, but we call them schedules, where you have people that go like enumerators, right? So like this mailed questionnaire method, you have a list of questions relating to the field of inquiry, and providing space for answers to be filled by like the respondents. So this is what some of us call like self-administered questionnaires, because the respondent is the one that will fill it. You can either mail it physically to the respondent, or maybe send an email or send a link, and then the person that is going to respond to it would give a response within a specific time. Usually you have a very polite, something that's called a covering note or a covering letter, that explains the detail and the aims of the objectives of collecting the information, and also the operational definitions of some of the things that are used in the questionnaire. You have that attached, such that the respondents can be able to answer it properly. So respondents are usually also even requested to extend their full cooperation by furnishing the correct replies. In that question, in that cover letter, you see that would request that the respondents should please extend their full cooperation by furnishing the correct replies and returning the questionnaire within that appropriate time, you know. So respondents are usually also taken into confidence by it's something that we call confidentiality, by ensuring them that the information that they supply, or the information supplied by them in the questionnaire will be kept strictly confidential, and in secret. We're not going to expose and say, this so person, this is what this person does, or look at what this person said, oh, look at the kind of amount of money that this person has, and the rest like that. So in order to ensure quick and a better response or a return, usually sometimes if it's like manually, these questionnaires are sent, like in the US where they post questionnaires to people. Sometimes you post the questionnaires and you even put the return ticket or the return fee for the person. The investigator will just put that fee there, so that not that put the fee, but like a ticket where the person just needs to put it back in the mailbox, and then the mailman comes to pick it up. So it comes usually like in form of a self addressed stamped envelope. So the person just puts it in, it has already been addressed, and this is usually used by people, research workers in other countries. In Nigeria, I'm not sure the postal system doesn't even work really very well. So this method is usually used by research workers, private individuals, non-official agencies, and sometimes even by the government, of advanced countries, And in this method, where you use mail questionnaire, the questionnaire is usually the only media of communication between the investigator and the respondents. Like I said, in modern times we use emails, and we use links, web links, and the rest of that. Consequently, the most important factor for success of mail questionnaires is the skill, efficiency, and the kind of care and wisdom, because this requires a lot of wisdom. A lot of people will not even answer you. They just see the question and even tear it. On the rest of that, people are not well trained to be able to do that. So your skill in being able to administer this, or put the questions, format it properly, make it make it efficient, would determine how you'll be successful with this rate. So, and the questions that are asked needs to be very clear, very brief, corroborative, non-offending, in a very good tone, unambiguous, to the point that not much guessing is left, because you're not going to be seeing the person is going to be feeling on its own. So, and while framing the questions, we expect that some general level of understanding should be available. So this last one we'll be talking about here is when you send enumerators, which some of us will just say is like interviewer administered, where you have an interviewer and the rest. So you have enumerators that go to collect this data. But before we talk about this method, it is really desirable that we understand the distinction between a questionnaire and a schedule, right? As we have explained before, a questionnaire is like a list of questions which are answered by the respondent himself in his own handwriting, while the schedule is the device of obtaining answers to the questions in form, like in a form which is filled by the interviewers or enumerators, or like the field agent who put these questions in a face-to-face situation, usually with the respondent. So just what we're just saying is that and this is not the difference of opinion of scholars among scholars with this questionnaire, schedule, the rest of that, So, but don't get yourself all worked up about this. When people, a lot of times when people just say questionnaire, they are talking about something self-administered, right? And then when some people are talking about schedule, they are talking about something that you have enumerators that have gone there to meet somebody physically. They are asking him a question and he's giving responses, and they are the ones filling it up. And this method is actually like one of the best methods, because a lot of times it's free from some shortcomings that are inherent in all the other methods that we have discussed so far. So in this method, the enumerators go to their respondents personally with the schedule, which is like a questionnaire with a list of questions, to ask them the questions there and record their replies. This method is generally used by big businesses, large enterprises, even individuals or research institutions, and so on, and even by the government for certain projects and investigations. Like the NDHS I talked about earlier, they have a very large, a big questionnaire. Anybody that can check their website, you see they have a big questionnaire that they use electronic devices to go and ask people physically and collect the data, and then they're able to analyze it. Population census all over the world is usually conducted using these techniques. So this questionnaire that I've been talking about all the while, it's something really important, because when most of you guys will be doing your research, it's likely that you're going to use questionnaire, especially if you're going to be collecting data primarily. If you're doing a secondary data analysis, which I'm not sure you'll be allowed to do, but if you're doing a secondary data analysis, you're not likely going to need a questionnaire. So we're going to be, I'll be giving you a few tips, very quick tips on how do you draft or frame a questionnaire. Drafting or framing a questionnaire, as has been pointed out earlier, the questionnaire is like the media of communication between the investigator and the respondent. And as such, the questionnaire should be designed or drafted with utmost care, and caution, so that or such that all relevant information, right, may be collected without any difficulty, without any kind of ambiguity, right, or without anything that is vague. We don't want any kind of vagueness, because remember that the data that we want to collect is what we're going to use for decision making after we have analyzed this data, right? So drafting a good questionnaire is a highly specialized skill, right? It requires great care, great skill, great wisdom, efficiency, and experience. And all of you will see, if you have to design a questionnaire, it's not a joke. It takes, even though there are no hard and fast rules that can be laid down for design or framing a questionnaire, but man, it takes a lot. It takes a lot of thinking. It takes a lot of review. It takes a lot of literature search. It takes a lot of a strong acumen to be able to design a questionnaire that will be useful for collecting data in a reliable manner. So, however, in this connection, I'll give you some few points that you should bear in mind, even though there are no hard and fast rules that are laid down. But these are tips in drafting the questionnaire. So first of all, you don't want a questionnaire that is too big. If it's too big, you can't keep up. Okay, you're going to ask somebody, maybe you're going to mail the questionnaire to someone. You don't expect that the person will spend 2 hours answering. People have other things to do with their lives, right? And with even the pandemic and everything now, most people are frustrated, right? There are a lot of mad people around now. So when you want to collect data from individuals, we don't expect that the size of the questionnaire should be so large. Something that people can easily answer within a short time, whether you're mailing to them or whether you are seeing them directly. All right. The next thing is that the questions should be very clear. We can't over talk about this. All right. It should be clear. It should be brief. It should be unambiguous. You don't expect people that don't have time. You want to be asking them questions that they have to be cracking their head. It's not even very clear. So it's really important that you put these things into consideration, right? Very important that the questions be clear and unambiguous. Okay. The next thing is that the questions should. I don't even think we should even talk about this. This is just clear. It should be logical, in a logical sequence. We don't expect you to be asking if a person owns. If you want to find out if a person owns a refrigerator, the logical order of the questions will be: do you own a refrigerator? When did you buy it? How much did it cost you? Right? Is it working properly? Have you serviced it? So you don't go and ask somebody, have you ever serviced your refrigerator? Is your refrigerator working properly? How much did you buy a refrigerator? Then you say, please sir, do you have a refrigerator? That's crazy. So the sequence really has to be in, the logical arrangement of the questions must be in a way that it facilitates even your own work, and you leave no chance for any omissions or duplications, right? Okay. The questions should be arranged in a natural logical order, All right, then it's not difficult far for you to understand that um, the questions also should be comprehensible, right? It shouldn't be vague, you know. It should be very clear so that people are clear about this issue and there's no any kind of ambiguity, right? So the way in which the questions will be so designed that they are readily comprehensible and they are easy to answer for the respondents. I don't mean you should go and ask a very easy question, but whatever the question is, that whatever the information you want to get from the respondents should be comprehensible in such a way. The question should come in a comprehensible manner so that it should not be tedious, or they should not tax themselves so much their memory so that it doesn't scatter the flow, or it's not comprehensible. So further questions involving like mathematical calculations like percentages, ratios should be avoided as much as possible, right? Questions that are sensitive or they are too personal in nature, you have to try by all means to avoid it. There are some very sensitive issues, that if you really want to get good data, you should try by all means to avoid it, or you have to be tactical in the way in which you drop those questions. Otherwise, people will get offended and just leave you off in the process of interview. Or somebody has been filling your questionnaire and at the end you ask him one kind of question, he just squeezes the questionnaire and throws it inside the dustbin and doesn't make it back for you. So sometimes there are some questions that are very personal. How much do you owe your neighbor? Or how much do you how many sexual partner, some very questions that may be very difficult. Do you clean your utensils yourself? Or some might even hurt some people's sentiments or their pride or their prestige, so some of those questions should, as far as possible, just avoid. It is also advisable to avoid questions on which the respondent may be reluctant or unwilling to give you information. For example, you're asking questions pertaining to income, or whether the person saves, or whether the person's habits or addictions or some social evils, or some age. Some people don't like to be asked their age, particularly in ladies. They say men are as old as they feel, while women are as old as they look. So women they don't like you asking them their age. So if you have to do this, it must be in a tactical manner, right? Okay, so the type of questions also that you ask, there are different types of questions. There are some questions that are open-ended while some are closed-ended. So some people call it short-ended, short questions, short as in SHUT. So the questions they don't give you chance to wander around. They just ask you a question and give you some options that you must select from, right? Mutually exclusive options that you must select from, right? Even though it may not necessarily be mutually exclusive, but the questions that you must select from. So the questions in a questionnaire may either they can be broadly classified as short questions. I don't mean short as in short, but short like closed, right? We call it closed-ended questions. Such questions, the possible answers are already suggested. You have suggested the answers by like you that made the questionnaire. You have suggested all the answers, and the respondents is required to just pick one of them. Okay, so there are the other type of questions are open-ended questions where the respondent has the liberty to just express himself frankly and independent, all the opinions, the problems in their own words. For example, you are just asking somebody, what are the drawbacks in our examination system, or what are the drawbacks in our LMS system? Okay, the person will just spill the beans. I know you students, if they ask you about the drawbacks of our LMS system, only God knows what you will say, but it's still something in progress and we're improving. ABU has one of the best LMS systems in Africa. I'm not saying this to boast, but it's if you have done some masters or a PhD online with other universities, you'll see what I'm saying. So if I ask a question that what is your best food? Rice, beans, fish, or gari? That's a closed-ended question stuff, I have to pick, the person that is answering has to pick any one of those. But if I ask you what is your best food and please explain, and I give you space to talk, some people will, only God knows what they'll be saying. Oh. Some people will be telling you how they even prepared the food. They used onions, used some kind, it's just crazy. All right. So that's that for the kind of questions. Okay. So you have to know the kind of questions that you put in and how those questions are. It's also important that you avoid leading questions. So don't bring questions that lead to that already give people the kind of answers. So you avoid that. For example, look at the question: why do you use this particular brand of blades? Like say Erasmic blades. Should be preferably be framed in, so you shouldn't do things like that. Why do you use this kind of things? Why do just ask what type of blades do you use, or which blade do you use, why do you prefer it, something like that. So don't ask questions that will lead to the answer or give somebody a clue of the answer. Then you should also put what we call cross checks. Right? Cross checks. So the questionnaire should be designed in such a way that you have some internal checks of the accuracy of the information that is supplied by the respondents, by including some connected questions, at least with respect to matters which are fundamental to the inquiry. For example, in a social survey, like we are in public health department, we take medical students to different communities in northern Nigeria, where we do something that we call the community diagnosis. Now, our questionnaires that we use, very large questionnaires also, and we use electronic questionnaires to collect data. We use tablets to collect data from these individuals. Our questionnaires have what we call cross checks. So because some women, they like to lie about, or some family heads, they like to lie about the number of children that they have, So if you ask how many children do you have, the person says 20. Oh, so we'll continue asking some other questions, and along the line we'll ask him how many male children does he have, and we continue asking some questions along the line. We're asking how many female children does he have. So imagine he told us 20, and then when we ask him how many male children, he said 5, and how many female children, he said 6. So we're having 11 here, and if we look ahead, before, when we asked him how many children he has already said 20. So you can see those cross checks are really important, to help. Another example is, you have a question, in a social survey for finding the age of the mother. So you ask, what is your age? And along the line, you can ask additional questions that can help as cross checks. What is your date of birth? So this can help. Okay. What is the age of your eldest child, for example? So a woman says her age is 30 and her eldest child is 25 or 26. Oh my God, where did this come from? So even though, like we said earlier, that you avoid questions like age and the rest, that sometimes it's very important, but you have to know how to collect it in a tactical manner. Okay. So, or you ask age at marriage. You can't be 30 years and your age at marriage it was so I'm sure you get the hang of it. So your age of your first child. The last thing here that we'll be talking about, or second to the last, is pre-test. So even after you've done all these things, you need to pre-test the questionnaire. You don't just finish with the questionnaire and just carry it to the field and go and start collecting data. Even if the questionnaire has been used somewhere before and you have made some modifications, you need to pre-test it. It's a way of taking a few questionnaires, and some people use like 10% of the number, their sample size, and they go and ask some particular go and ask those questions and see how people react to those questions, and see how those questions can be modified in such a way that you get actually the accurate information that you want to get out of this. So it's really important that you put this into perspective. So just from a practical point of view, it's desirable for you to try out the questionnaire on a small scale, i.e. on a small cross-section of the population for which the inquiry is intended. We usually don't like you going to, if you want to do something in ABU, we don't like you going to pre-test it in ABU, because some people already have some foreknowledge of the information. So we prefer you to go and test it in somewhere that is similar, such that you can make your adjustments and then come back to to do the inquiry now on a large scale. So this testing on a small scale, which we say is pre-test, can be found to be very useful in practice. The given questionnaire can be improved upon, modified in the light of those drawbacks or those shortcomings that you saw, or those problems that you saw when you went for the pre-test. Pre-testing also helps like the investigator to decide upon what are the best methods of asking some questions, or for soliciting the required information. And then we'll now talk about something that is very important. People leave this out, but this is super important, right? You have to provide what we call a covering letter from the organizers. This letter from you that you are organizing the inquiry should be part of the questionnaire, for the following purposes. Number one, it should clearly explain in brief the objectives and the scope of the survey. It's very important. You can't play with this at all, so that you invoke the interest of the respondents and impress upon them to render their full cooperation. You have to tell them what this thing's all about, and what is in it for them, and so that they can even return the questionnaire, or they can listen to your schedule, and then they can give you appropriate answers, within that period. The next thing is that also it should contain that note that about some of these definitions that you are going to be using, so that people don't get confused. Some terminologies, even though we want you to use big terminology, sometimes you may not be able to avoid it. So the various terms and the concepts used in the questionnaire, the units of measurement that you are going to use to be used, the degree of accuracy, just let them know. All right. The third thing here is that it should take the respondents in confidence. So there's something we call confidentiality. So we should be able to let them know that whatever information that they are going to give us will be kept completely secret. They will not be harassed in any way later and say, so you are doing this, Mr. Lagwaja, or this guy, you are doing, look at what you no. So, and in case of, if you are mailing the questionnaire, you should also do like some kind of self-addressed stamped envelope, so that people can mail it back manually. Nobody's going to use his money to be mailing back questionnaire for you, when people are even hustling to just eat their food. You're even lucky man to even attend to the questionnaire in the first place, and complete it for you. So also to ensure a quick and better response to your by your respondents, you can just let them know what is in it for them. We're not saying you should give them some kind of gifts that will incite them to say some things, but sometimes it's important to give some kind of coupons or something that can make them do the correct thing. All right. A copy of the survey report also can be promised to some interested participants. So anybody that is interested, at the end of your research, you can give the person some kind of stuff, and then the person goes. Then the last but not the least, I'm not even sure if this is last, but we were saying that you have to put the mode of tabulation, the analysis, visualization, whatever you are putting in the questionnaire, the tabulation, the computerization should be kept in mind in such a way that the format should be very, very good, right? Put the format in a proper format, so that it's appealing and people can. Yeah, so these are the sources of secondary data. The sources of secondary data are broadly classified into the following two groups, So it's either they are from published sources or from unpublished sources. Now remember that when we talked about secondary data, we're talking about data because you remember, if we're talking about the sources, is you, right? It's from you as an individual. All right. So there are a number of national, government, semi-government, or private organizations, and also some international agencies which collect statistical data relating to business, health, prices, consumption, production, income, health, population, and a number of socioeconomic phenomena. And they publish their findings in statistical reports, on a regular basis, maybe monthly, maybe quarterly, maybe annually. And these publications of the various organizations serve as a very powerful source of secondary data. Okay, and like I said, this is you, because for them it's their primary data, but for you it is secondary, right? So it's a powerful source. Some of these sources will be outlined in the next slide, and you have some that are not published. Some of them are not published. They're actually they can be from governmental organizations also, but they're not published. They can even be from research institutions that are not published. You see in the next slide. So remember we talked about sources of secondary data, and we said they're either published or unpublished. So here we'll be talking about the published sources. So, and for the published sources, the first one is an official publication of like a central government, right? So an official publication of a central government. So this is like publication from government sources. Okay, so there are various publications that come from governmental organizations, which what they do is they compile and they publish statistical data on a number of different things. For example, in Nigeria, we have the Nigeria Emergency Management Agency, which collects a lot of data on different stuff. So we have also the National Bureau of Statistics, or the Nigeria Bureau of Statistics, which does a lot of data, collecting income data, health data, demographic data, and the rest of that. And the popular NDHS, like I talked about. Okay, so we have also publications from semi-government statistical organizations, and these semi-government statistical organizations include places like the Statistical Department of the Central Bank of Nigeria. I'm sure you must have heard a lot of statistics that come out from this department a lot, even in recent times in the news. Okay, then you have Statistics Department of the Ministry of Finance. Also you have a lot of information coming out from there. These are secondary sources that a lot of us use also in health. For them, like I said, for them it's primary. For us, it's secondary. The distinction between primary and secondary is on who is actually collecting the data originally and who's actually using it. Okay, so you have also publications from commercial and financial institutions, reports from various committees also, also from research institutions like I've mentioned earlier, and then reports that come from various committees and commissions that are appointed by the government. I know we know most of all of these things. You can have publications in the newspapers and periodicals, and then you can also have international publications, and we've mentioned a lot of some of all this. So it's not all the time that statistical data need to be published. Sometimes there are various sources of unpublished statistical material, such as some records that are maintained by some private firms or some business enterprises that may not like to release their data to any outside agency, for sometimes even for security reasons, right? So the various departments and offices of the central and state government, they sometimes they have a lot of data that is not published, and also research is carried out by individual research scholar in universities. Also, sometimes they have not published them. They are there. They are planning to publish them. Like I have a lot of data that I've collected that I've not published. Only God knows when I'm going to publish it. But somebody can come and see the data, and if it's important for him, he can use it as his own secondary data. For me, it's primary, but for the person that's going to come and use it, is secondary. In some socioeconomic surveys, the information is gathered from the respondents with the promise that is exclusively meant for research programs, and this will be strictly confidential. So they are already telling the respondents that this information that were gathered, we're going to use it for some form of research. So, but we're not going to reveal their identities and the rest like that. Alrighty. So, in conclusion, as we have all discussed, and we have discovered that there are different ways one can obtain data for an inquiry that one intends to undertake. So we have learned in this session that the sources of data, right? That there are different ways to obtain data for statistical inquiry, right? And then there are sources of data which can be primary or secondary sources, if you remember, and then the methods of obtaining primary data. We talked about the methods of obtaining primary data, which are the primary sources. We also went ahead and we talked about the ways of designing a very good questionnaire, as a questionnaire is one of those pristine ways of obtaining primary data. Okay, so we talked about also secondary data as being published or unpublished, and we gave a lot of examples. Having obtained our data, we're now going to learn how to describe this data we have obtained in the next module, where we'll be talking about data description, descriptive statistics, and the rest. So I hope each and every one of you enjoyed this session. As usual, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask. I know a lot of people are already in exam mode now. I wish you all the best in your exams, and just let me know if you have any issues. I'll be ready to help. Thank you very much for listening, and as always, peace. I'll catch you in the next one. Thank you.